So I want to talk a little bit about that and about other topics that surround this wave of right-wing politics that seems to be surging all around us. Of course, it's a wave that's encouraged by the far-right techno-autocratic takeover of the American government by Donald Trump and his acolytes. This tide is rising in Europe as well. Now, just 2 weeks ago, we had a far-right summit in Spain. In Germany, the AfD party, supported by Elon Musk and J.D. Vance, got to 20% of the vote. Nigel Farage in the UK is now topping the polls. And as we have seen in the movie, there are many other groups that we don't know about that are creating networks and getting connected and starting to have influence in their domestic politics. So it's a troubled political moment, and we want to try to discuss, starting from the movie, but expanding beyond, to discuss it with 4 guests. 2 of them will be here, 2 of them are going to be in a video conference. The first one I'm going to invite is actually one of the main characters of the movie. Please welcome Harry Shukman. Please. We have a guest from Switzerland. She's a member of Les Foulards Violets, the Purple Scarves, a collective of women fighting Islamophobia and discrimination. Please welcome Saoussen Hammami. Nope. And then online we are joined by, from London, another of the big characters in the movie, Nick Lowles. Nick, welcome. And from the US, although she's French and her activism is in France, but she's right now in the US, author and social justice and climate activist, Lumir Lapray. Welcome, Lumir. There are things that are specific to what Saoussen and Lumir do with their organizations that you're going to get into later. But I want to start from the movie. And the first thing I guess everybody needs to say is, wow, Nick and Harry. I want to pick up on a couple of quotes from the movie. But before I do that, maybe, Nick, give us some context just briefly. Hope, not hate. When was it funded? What's the mission? The activities, who supports it? Give us just the headlines about the organization.
Sure. So I got involved in anti-fascism 35 years ago. And to begin with, I was part of a magazine, an investigative magazine. In 2001, we had some riots in the north of England. And it was a consequence of that and my feeling and feeling of others that traditional anti-fascism wasn't working. We weren't in the communities where trouble was happening and the far right were gaining ground, and that we needed to do something different and we needed to go into those communities. But also we couldn't just fight hate with hate. We had to offer a message of hope. And we had to take people from where they were, not where we wanted them to be. And we had to understand that sometimes people were voting or supporting the far right because of insecurities or issues in their own lives, in society, economic issues. And we couldn't write people off, and we had to treat people with respect. And we had to separate out the far right activists, like you've seen in the film, but also the people who live and may live in these communities and maybe support them, and we had to take them on the journey. So that's basically Hope Not Hate's work. We combine research, community organizing, education work, and online campaigning as well. So we have all these different arms, as you probably saw in the film.
Harry, how did this story start? Who brought the story to the other between you two?
So I was a journalist working in the UK, really interested in how the anti-vaccine at the time was working with far-right groups, and I was doing some undercover reporting on my own. I'm not sure how effectively, but was taking an interest in it, and met some of Nick's colleagues at the research team at Hope Not Hate. And together we came up with the idea that I'd do a longer term investigative project that would last around a year. Any longer might risk my safety and sanity, and to see what we could really find out. The movie the investigation you see in the film was born out of that year.
Nick, do you think that from your experience, but also especially this experience here, going into Europe and different European groups and seeing how networked they are, and so, do you feel that people in the UK and across Europe understand how serious what's going on is?
Well, I think the politics over the last few weeks has probably brought it home to many people, both the transatlantic, the transnational element of the far right, what happens particularly in the US comes over to Europe, but also what happens in Europe. But also I think that ideas, money, people, influence moves across countries. So I think that, we haven't had the kind of far right political threat that many countries in Europe, continental Europe, have faced over the last few years. It is happening now. But I also think that with the rise, with Donald Trump become president again and everything that connects up, it's not just about the far right. It's really a battle for our liberal democracy and our democratic values. And I think that this is an international fight. I think, our film highlighted how the far right are organising internationally. Actually, the kind of people on the pro-democracy, anti-fascist side need to organise internationally as well.
There is, in the movie, big focus, of course, is around race science, right? So we don't need to go into that, but just to say that these are a set of discredited ideas that are presented as scientific, and that's part of our warped information ecosystem right now. Somebody, I remember who in the documentary says, and I quote, "People don't have to accept a ridiculous idea; they just need to get used to it." And I think that kind of encapsulates the mechanism by which these ideas become sort of mainstream or very close to the mainstream. Is that also your analysis, or are there other elements at play?
Yeah, no, I kind of think so. Ideas that, as you say, were fringe ideas, were kind of considered cranks or extremist ideas 20, 30, 40 years ago, discredited ideas, are in the mainstream. And as I say, I've been doing this for 35 years now. And I think what shocked me about this was that you had, and obviously we were doing this before Trump got elected, this film, what you had were basically hardline Nazi ideas joining together with the money and the support of billionaires in the US. And this is a toxic mix. And when you think about Elon Musk and you think about some of the others around him who have massive influence on social media networks, they talk about moving the Overton window. As I say, that the whole spectrum of politics is shifted to the right. And people don't need to take up all the really extreme ideas, but because now we're debating moderate elements of it, they seem more accepted. And I think that this is a really dangerous time. What I would also say really importantly is that we can't just be against these ideas. We can't just be against these people or these parties. We've got to really figure out what we stand for, and we've got to defend what we stand for. The difficulty for us is that many of the things that we are defending, many of the kind of key elements of liberal democracy, are increasingly discredited in people's eyes. The system isn't working for people economically or socially. And I think that, we can't just support the status quo. There are basic principles that we have to defend, but at the same time, we've also got to move them in a more democratic way so they work for ordinary people as well. But I think that we are facing the most challenging times, and it is incredible to think that the very concept of democracy, liberal parliamentary democracy, is now being challenged by the biggest country in the world. And I think it's not just the threat from the US, it's all across Europe now. But I think that we really do have to rally around, because the stakes are so high.
So at the end of the film, we realize that somehow this is a story of follow the money, right? You follow plenty of other things, but at the end, you hit on a name, and is the name of the funder, and then the funder, as we saw in the last text built into the film, withdraws the funding, and things unravel. So how happened that we allowed that kind of money to become so impactful without noticing it so far?
Well, I think that partly it's often hard to track the money in real time. You've got to be inside these organisations to really understand. But I think that there have been networks gathering at whether they're political, whether they're race science like we've seen here, whether it's religious extremism. There is huge amounts of money, particularly coming from North America into Europe, many of it by people connected up with J.D. Vance. And we kind of saw his speech in Munich a couple of weeks ago. That's the political articulation of some of this kind of, but I think that hopefully, certainly for us at Hope Not Hate, but also for other people, we've shone the light on a small section of it, but there's a much bigger world out there where money, ideas, people, encouragement is happening on an international scale. And it is, as I say, it's our job to expose it, but also, we as civil society organisations, human rights organisations, anti-racist organisations, faith communities, whoever, we need to start to come together and start to organise. And I think part of the problem is because they're operating so seamlessly on an international level, we're also consumed by what we're doing in our own countries and the battles that we've got in our own countries. And many of us, on the defensive in their own countries, we don't often see what's happening behind the scenes, and like the conferences in Eastern Europe, or the conferences that are happening, in the UK and in France and all over the place, where these people are meeting and money is behind these meetings. We're talking about millions coming across the Atlantic now. But as I say, the money leads to politics, and what we are seeing now is politics that is about undermining the basic pillars of our liberal way of life, and we've all got to counter that.
Lumir, have you had a chance to watch the movie from a distance?
I have. Yeah.
So I'm curious about your reaction to it and to the story.
I think the money aspect is what surprised me most, indeed, because oftentimes in more leftist progressive circles, we're just inundated with far-right content, and we're like, how is it possible that they're so good, that they're so well connected, that they have so many outlets, that they buy publishing houses, they buy media, they have newsletters, they have all of these people on YouTube creating content all day. And then you kind of feel defeated, you're like, how are they just so much better than us? And then you realize, no, they're just better funded. They are incredibly well funded and well connected. And for me, that was, I think, important to realize, because, it is true that we tend to be very self-centered nationally. There's so much going on in France right now with the rise of the far right, that we tend to just really be in this. and focus every day on, the new thing in the Overton window. But then you look at what's happening in the US, which is, that's what I'm doing right now. And you see that not only do these people say very similar things, but they obviously know each other. And we don't know each other on the progressive side, because I think a lot of times we think that because we're right and because we're telling the truth and we do have people's best interests at heart, it's enough, and people will realize it and they'll understand it. And something that I really appreciated with the documentary as well is this distinction between, there are hardcore activists whose lives are dedicated and resources are dedicated to bringing down democracy. There's us, and then in between, there's millions of people who are very frustrated by a system that is obviously not working for them anymore. And they're looking for answers, and they're looking for alternatives, and they're looking for people who make the establishment uncomfortable, who make people in power uncomfortable. And then you look at Donald Trump. And I mean, if I'm very angry about my situation, if I'm like, why do I have to work 2 jobs and I still can't afford healthcare? I am looking for someone who is going to make the powerful people uncomfortable. And that is what Donald Trump does. And I think that is very important to realize when we are thinking of these millions of people who are now following these hardcore activists without knowing what these people are about. Because I guarantee, I come from a working class, white, rural community where most people now vote for the far right. None of them know about what we've seen in the documentary. None of them know. They have no idea. And that, to me, is the big question, is both how do we make that visible? How do we tell people about this? And how do we offer a counter story, a counter narrative that is inclusive and that makes them also feel at home? Because, I mean, I am biased for it because that is my job, but I really do not believe that we can do without these people who are falling prey to the far right narrative today.
Okay.
We need to hold them accountable, but we also need to make space for them.
Yeah.
That is my belief.
Saoussen, your reaction to the film, you are looking at this for the first time tonight and you're looking at this from Switzerland. So
first of all, thank you for bringing in such incredible movies and also for talking about this subject. And thank you, Harry, for living through hell for I don't know how many months, but that sounded really like hell. As a Swiss citizen, clearly not Swiss ethnically, I would say, and also as a Muslim woman, I'm looking at that documentary and I'm like, actually, there's a tendency today to say that fascism is back. But I'm here to tell you, fascism never left. It was always here. The only thing is that people don't listen to minorities. So we've been barking about that for 50 years now. We've been saying things are really bad. Everything that is happening outside of Europe and outside of Switzerland is going to happen here. And everything that you see and accept in other countries, you're going to see it here and you will have to accept it here. And now that it's coming back home, people are surprised. They're like, oh, I've never seen that coming. Well, we've seen that coming for 50 years, sometimes even more. And when I talk to people, they're like, no, but actually, this type of fascism is new. This type of way of doing things is new. It's not. What we're living today is everything that we've been living, like that the Jewish community has been living in the 20s and the 30s. Just now, it's another community. And in 50 years' time, it's going to be another one. So it's always the same scheme of history that comes back. And it's always the same people, in a way, that actually are here to announce it to the people, to the citizens and to the governments that things are really, really bad, and that these type of ideologies, because they're well funded, and also because it's easy. It's so easy to say that I cannot afford healthcare because Muhammad is working and I'm not. So at the end of the day, I'm actually a bit frustrated with the dialogue around the far-right movement, because I feel that just like a lot of different things, we wait for the white person to say it in order to believe it. And when people like me, or black people that have been murdered in the streets for the past few years, or we've seen as well, like, we always believe that Switzerland is like a little island of peace. Switzerland is extremely good at PR. We're extremely good at putting in an image that we're so much better than everyone else, when actually, when you look at the history, there's nothing more disgusting than the history of Switzerland when it comes to colonies, when it comes to fighting the fight against minorities, when it comes to applauding fascism. And when you say that, they're like, but go back to your country. Listen, dude, you colonized my country. I'm here because of you. At the end of the day, we are here because of history, in a way. And not reading that history, and also something that I'm quite frustrated tonight. I'm not gonna lie. I'm sorry. The thing is that we also have a tendency, when there's a big problem that is targeting minorities, we look at minorities and we're like, find a solution. It's not my problem. You brought the problem. You find the solution. But we don't do that. We've been building communities. We've been trying to teach people. We've been trying to talk to people. We've been trying to tell them that, listen, a Muslim woman is actually a human being. And when you give that type of talk, they're like, oh my goodness, you're so extremist. In a way, like, we've been fighting that for so many years. But as long as there's not that validation from a white person that becomes the victim, people don't see people like me.
So there was, like, last week or 2 weeks ago, the Swiss Center for Islam and Society published a study that said that somehow there is an anti-Muslim sentiment in about 2/3 of the population in Switzerland. So it's not an individual problem or case-by-case problem. It's somehow a more pervasive one. That's what you are suggesting as well.
Yeah, it's
right?
systemic. And the thing with Switzerland, which is probably a bit different from the other European countries or other democracies, is that we have a semi-direct democracy, which is a beautiful system. Like, participative democracy is really beautiful, unless it goes into the hand of big money, like we've seen in the documentary. So when you see, like, I'm 35 years old. Since I was 8 or 9 years old, I've been seeing things on the streets targeting Muslim women, saying, "Look at this woman with the burqa, with like the full veil. She needs to go out." And like, we've seen that for so many years. And at the end of the day, we don't realize that these are people. And the thing is that this is, when you talk with people and you tell them this is actually a problem, you're actually talking about the lives of people, and you're putting it in the center of the conversation, and you're asking the citizen to choose if yes or no this community is actually welcome here. When actually we don't have to ask you for welcome here. I'm here. I can't, like, you can't do anything about that. But that use of a legal tool is made always against the minorities. Should it be against Muslim women? But at some point it was also against Italians and then Spanish. And like, every 20, 30 years, there's a new minority.
Henry, one of the things that come out pretty clearly from the film is that the far-right movements present a certain image and discourse when they talk in public, and they have a completely different discourse and language when they think nobody's listening or nobody's seeing them. And then we kind of go back and forth. Are these far right, extreme right? Give us after this experience, give us your mapping of that space. Who's in this space? I mean, you spoke about anti-vaxxers, there is racism, there are other forms of discrimination. They all seem kind of coalescing around in that political space. What's your mapping of that?
Just to pick up on something you said about noticing when the far right are putting on a different face. I'm glad that Havana's inclusion of the rights of reply are at the end of the film, because you can get a taste of that when Eric Ahrens is talking about Catholic lay orders, and as an example of how he used that as a group of men meeting up instead of the SS comparison that he made to me. And so that's an example of just how the far right will try and obfuscate when they're talking to journalists in a way that they won't do when they talking to someone who, in a private room. So as to your question about what the far right looks like, in the UK we tend to use an example, a distinction between the radical right and the extreme right. The radical right being largely in favour of most elements of democracy, probably having an illiberal take on it, not equal universal rights for all minorities, religious faiths, sexual orientations, and so on, but broadly participating in democracy, compared to the extreme right, which would be using violence, neo-Nazi activism that is deliberately violent, looking to commit terrorist acts, and of course the border between them can be quite porous sometimes, as you see in the film. Members of Britain First, who are participating in an electoral process, who are nonetheless, some of whom talking about Holocaust denial, or you see the activist who has Hitler for his ringtone, a Hitler speech for his ringtone. So sometimes the boundary between them can be a little bit messy, but those are the two kind of broad groups, and we saw that saw two really shocking incidents in the UK last year. Something in the radical right, the election of 5 MPs at the Reform Party, run by Nigel Farage, and then of course the summer riots that saw the biggest explosion of racist rioting in the post-war period. So 2 examples of what you might call radical and extreme right.
Yeah. Nika, a personal question, because many of us now have friends, particularly in the US, that feel threatened in their personhood for different reasons, but threatened by the context, the political context, but also sometimes directly because of list of potential retribution by the new head of the FBI, or a tweet by Elon Musk that would target you and totally destroy your life, and so on. And then we see you in the movie reading the message that says, somebody should take out this guy, and the guy is you. So how do you keep functioning in that kind of context? I assume you have safety measures in place, but what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, on one level, you do get used to them after a while. I've done this for a long time. I've had threats to kill me. I've had police come to tell me that there's been plots. There was a plot to kidnap me once, etc. So on one hand, that isn't anything new, but at the same time, I think more than that, the worst thing is putting other people around you at risk, putting your family at risk, and my family have suffered, been threatened on the street, and they've suffered themselves, and you kind of feel a huge amount of guilt about what you put them through, and obviously massive concerns. I have to say that the level of threats and the level of violence now is greater than it ever was before, and often there's a frustration because the police don't do enough to protect me or protect others. I mean, I think that it is easy to feel that it's too much or whatever, but at the end of the day, that's why these people are threatening you, and you've got to use it as a motivator. And I've been lucky. I have amazing colleagues. Harry, obviously one of them, but I've got amazing colleagues, really supportive, friends, and as an organisation, we look out for each other. So we take it in our stride. We have our good days. We have our bad days, but we obviously are quite well used to this. So we kind of put a whole load of security measures in place, both on a personal level, but also on an organisational level as well.
I want to ask you a bit about Tommy Robinson, whom we see in the movie, and in Switzerland, I assume most of us may have heard his name, but we don't really know him. But we don't really have a character like that, at least at the national level in this country. But there are characters like that in France and in Italy and Germany and in Austria and in the Netherlands and elsewhere. So you've written a book about him. I have the impression that kind of his trajectory is instructive on how these characters emerge and fill a vacuum and assemble a following. Give us the cheat sheet about him, but essentially about this type of political character.
I mean, I think the thing to say about him is that he is one of the most charismatic people. I mean, certainly, I've met him on several occasions. He's unbelievably charismatic, and he is a leader of a kind of street army. You know, he's willing to get involved in fights. He's willing to go to prison. He's very good at his videos and his kind of confrontational style. But of course, underneath it all, though, you know, there is that threat of violence. You know, he's been involved in criminality for a very long time, and you know, he runs his kind of organization like a kind of organized crime group. So, you know, on one hand, he likes to portray himself as this victim and as this martyr, but underneath, he's making millions out of it. And, you know, he is one of the biggest, not only kind of Islamophobes in this country, but I think internationally now. You know, he's now supported and funded by Elon Musk. Elon Musk has come out to, you know, helping him with his legal fees. He's currently in prison. But, you know, on that day of that demonstration that you saw in London in July, his tweets on X, just on that one day, were seen by 58 million people. I mean, you know, this is an international phenomenon, and that obviously makes him even more dangerous. But at the same time, you know, it's obviously our job to kind of debunk him, to expose the kind of, you know, his double standards and his lies and everything. But ultimately, it is difficult because he is someone who's embodies this sense of victimhood that many people feel, but also that kind of aggressiveness that kind of plays into this kind of Andrew Tate male masculinity world. And I think that, you know, when he comes out of prison, he's going to be in an even bigger name, and he's going to be even more dangerous. I do not think that the riots in England in the summer would have escalated as much if it hadn't been for him. Every single protest that turned violent around the country, the protesters were chanting his name. He was winding them up. He's given them an identity, and as he winds them up, he gives them targets. And you know, they go off and they try to burn down hotels. They attack people in cars in the street. I mean, as you know, Harry said, it was the worst racist violence that we've seen, at least since the end of World War II, perhaps ever.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, he was banned from X or Twitter for a while and then reinstated by Elon Musk. But I want to come back to the platforms in a second. But first, Saoussen, when you see this kind of language, the Tommy Robinson kind of language, etc., right? We don't have characters like that in Switzerland, but that language we do have, or some of it. Do you encounter it in your activities?
We do have a lot of it in Switzerland, especially when it comes to the Muslim community. We like to talk about an Islamophobia calendar at Les Foulards Violets and other anti-Islamophobia organizations, is that we are so used to that type of dialogue that we know by each month of the year what type of insults we're going to get. So we're now in Ramadan, so the fasting month. Now we're having everything about those poor kids that are forced to fast because their parents are terrible to them. Then we're going to approach the summer. It's going to be everything about burkini. So for us, it facilitates our job because I'm just taking everything that I've been saying for 5 years. I say it again this year. I'm going to say it again next year. It's always the same thing. They're not very imaginative, which makes our job a bit easier, but it's very tiring. And also something that is quite tiring as well is that we are Le Collectif Foulards Violets. We are a collective that is part of the women's strike. However, they never come, like journalists or whatever, never come to us to ask questions about women in general. They only come to us when there's a scandal, as if we have to reply to every single scandal that they create, that the media is creating around Muslim women. And so now that I'm actually, you called us to kind of hear without any scandal. I want to thank you for that, and I want to call any other journalist that would like to contact. Yeah, probably, but yeah, in the sense that we are always kind of put in front of some type of response that we want to give. So
there is a crisis, and we call upon you to respond to the crisis, but there is never a continuous developed dialogue in order to create a different kind of society.
That would be too kind. That would be way too kind. So we're still really always in the defense. And something that is quite difficult as well is that I think in the documentary, something that I found quite interesting that you said is that they're not, I think it was your colleague that said, they're not all Nazis, but they're okay to associate with them. In my vocabulary, associating with a Nazi with a smile is actually being a Nazi. I don't know, but like in my opinion, it's that. And the thing is that in Switzerland we see that a lot of the time, meaning that we have some very extreme views, and other people are going to jump on that views for like for speech reason or democracy reason, etc. But kind of hiding behind it in order to bring in their own narratives. And for me, these are the people that are more dangerous than the far right, because these are the vessel of the hate speech.
Nick, Tommy Robinson presents himself as a journalist. We see him going around followed by a camera, and so in the film, of course, one of those journalists that say the truth that others don't, the other journalists don't say, right? So you're a journalist, you've worked at the Times of London and other big newspapers, take risks to uncover the truth. And by the way, in the film, you only saw part of your investigation. You've published stuff in The Guardian, The Spiegel, and other things. What is the exact role of media today? Because my impression is that for a long time we saw the rise of platforms, digital, social media, and so, but somehow the mainstream media, even if they've lost outlets and advertising and money, they've kind of hold their ground in terms of the influence and the impact. And now the balance suddenly seems to be tilting very rapidly, and the influence is shifting completely to figures like Robinson and many others who have tens of millions of followers on social media. Do you see this shift happening as well?
Was that a question for me or Nick?
Yeah, for you. Sorry.
I think that probably in the case of Tommy Robinson, there's maybe a more cynical element at play. So much of what he focuses on is money, donations. I think you see that in the film. Tommy Robinson's quest to part his fans from their cash, and now the platforms that he uses can be very easily monetized. He can get a lot of money from Twitter. He can get a lot of money from posting on there, from ad deals, and I think that he sees that as a good way to just to rinse his audience. I do think that there's probably a wider point to make, maybe about declining trust in mainstream media that is creating a bit of a space online for people seeking alternative narratives, and sometimes that can be a force for good in that it allows for niche publications to exist. I mean, I was a freelance journalist with a really niche blog about the intersection between anti-vax movement and the far right, and for a year that helped to pay my living expenses. And I don't think that kind of thing would have been possible, 10, 20 years ago. But of course, with that comes the increased appetite for alternative narratives that people think are being suppressed by the mainstream. And that is where I think there's a lot of avenue for exploitation by extremists.
Now, a lot of the people who vote for people like Trump are people like often you and me, right? They are respectable, generous, intelligent, scared of the future or even of the present. And so sort of that begs the question, why do they end up voting for figures like that? And I want to throw the question to Lumir, because I know you're in the US right now, traveling through rural counties and former industrial regions and so, and trying to understand why, and here I think I'm quoting your upcoming book, why your best friend from back home is voting for the far right. We all have an uncle or a best friend or a former best friend who is in this situation. So what answers have you found so far to that question?
I have found that we agree on a lot of things. The question that I think for me is the most important and the most telling is, do you think this system works? Pretty much everyone who is working class and who votes for Trump that I have met, their answer is no, it does not, because it objectively does not. We're talking about people who are living in incredibly dire conditions, people who are living in trailers with, sometimes there's no running water for a couple of weeks because they can't pay for it. People who have been fed heroin in pills by, the opioid crisis in this country was manufactured by labs with the consent of the state, and it now kills 100,000 people a year in working class white communities mostly. And so I think people look around and they're like, wait, this sucks. And I agree. It's really hard not to agree with that. The problem, though, then becomes the solution. And I think that there's an element of the system is, excuse my French, fucking me over. And so why would I choose somebody else who looks like they're from the system to defend me? And I think Donald Trump here is a really interesting personality because he is clearly so different from career politicians. He is rich, and people assume that because everything has been monetized in this country, because there is so much money in politics, they assume that this is the root cause of corruption. And if someone who has money runs, then it can't be to be richer because he's already rich. So he has to do it because he has their best interests at heart. You also have this very strong sense that this country has been run like a corporation forever. Profit trumps everything. And so it makes sense for a lot of people to put a businessman at the head of this country because they'll say, you know what? We're not citizens. We're just consumers anyways. So might as well just put in someone who knows how to run a business because apparently that is what the United States is. And so I think what I think honestly, this fight is the fight for the soul of the nation. There are people who are clearly deceiving people whom I love because my community, this is my community. You mentioned this, my best friend votes for the far right. I so understand the frustration of minorities who, as Saoussen has said, have been warning us for decades, and we have not listened, and we really should have. And when I say we, I mean, the left, the alternative to the far right at this point. And we have not. But I think something that frustrates me these days is that the white working class who now supports the far right is being characterized as, well, they're a bunch of racist rednecks. What do you expect? And I don't think that's true because, that it's just not, but I think maybe that's beyond the point. B, the question is, okay, well, we need them to win. Literally, we do not have enough votes without them. And my question is, what will make us win? And I believe that winning them back will. And it's possible because a lot of these people voted for a radically different platform a couple decades ago. Where I am right now in West Virginia. West Virginia is the second reddest state. So the second state that has given Donald Trump its highest score in November. They were Democrats for 140 years. They were the stronghold of Democrats. The same people who now vote for Trump. And what happened is that their conditions worsened. They used to be coal miners. They used to have a very difficult job, but an okay pay, a very good pension, and a really good healthcare system. All of this because capitalists have destroyed unions, have destroyed the economy for the profit of a couple billionaires, their very basic everyday life has worsened. And so they are looking for solutions. They are looking for hope, and they are looking for someone to blame. And as Saoussen said, it is easy to blame your neighbor because you run into your neighbor. You see them. Where I'm from, we don't see billionaires. Do you think billionaires come to my village of like 300 people? No, they don't. And so we don't know better. And that is a problem, because then that happens. Then we vote for these people believing profoundly that they have our best interests at heart and that they're going to make our lives better. And we all know how that happens, like what happens.
And the difference between urban and rural. But, you know, investigating and exposing the facts like you Harry, and Nick and your team did is, of course, central. But then what do we do with that information once we have it? I mean, we put it up here on the screen, and then it makes, you know, Conru withdraw his money from the website, but the money probably is going to go somewhere else. But then what do we do with that information? What's the how now going forward? Nick?
Well, yeah, just jumping first. I mean, I think, you know, as I said at the beginning, Hope Not Hate has many different parts to it. And we have a campaigning part, we have a community organising part, we have an educational part. So the research that we get, we use in our different ways. So, you know, we might use some of the intelligence in our election campaigning. We're finding out about opposition research about some of our opponents. It tells us our research helps us work out the issues that we need to answer in advance. So, I mean, clearly it is not enough. And in a way, that's exactly why Hope Not Hate was created in the first place back in 2004, because it was not enough just for us to be journalists. We haven't lost any, as you can see in the film, we haven't lost any of that ability to do research, and the importance both of doing kind of open research, but also doing the kind of human intelligence research that Harry did. At any one time, we kind of might have up to 20 people inside different far right groups any one time, some of them for years and years and years. But, you know, we use that information in the rest of our organisation. And increasingly, I mean, one of our key things we're doing in the UK now is working with climate groups, working with campaign groups, working with faith groups and other community groups to disseminate that information so they're better armed. And I think, you know, one of the real things that we found, certainly in the UK, and as I say, we're behind many of the other countries across Europe in terms of facing the kind of political far-right threat, is that the enemies of us, the enemies of the climate groups, the enemies of the democracy groups are the same people, and they move around. It's like jelly, you know, they pop up one place and you suppress them and they pop up somewhere else. So we need to start working much better together. So we're sharing information much better now than we previously did. So, you know, it is so important that our research guides the rest of our work, but ultimately, it's about winning hearts and minds. It's about convincing people that the far right do not have the answers, that they're exploiting them. They're coming up with kind of, you know, Ponzi schemes and other little tricks to try to hoodwink people. But at the same time, you know, it's also offering an alternative, and that some of that alternative offers hope, because, you know, certainly in the UK, there's a direct link between pessimism and support for the far right. Mm-hmm. The more pessimistic you are about your own life and the life around you and the community around you, the more likely you're to support the far right. So our research fuels all the rest of our work.
Okay. I have plenty of other questions, but we're going a bit long. So I want to throw it to the audience and see whether there are questions from the audience. We have microphones here, there, and there to start. Yeah. Yes, if possible.
Okay, I'll try in English. Thanks, Harry, for your job on being here. I have two questions. First, they look, the guys you met, they look quite naive, like they didn't look suspicious towards you? Did you have to gain their trust? And second question, how did they discover your real identity? Did you tell them, or no?
So the second question first, they discovered who I was when Havana sent her emails to them saying, you're going to be appearing in this documentary. That was the first time they heard about who I really was. I had ghosted them, many of them, at the end of my time undercover. And then there was a gap of several months before those emails came. And so what you see in the film is the highlights of our time together. I had done quite a lot to win their trust, and actually the race scientists who you see, I was meeting in between May and November of 2023, but by that point I'd been undercover for 6 months already, passing between different groups in the UK to help establish my background, my credentials, my credibility, and that helped to make the people I was seeing in the race science world feel like I was on their team. So there were lots of things like that we tried to do to make it safer for me and win their trust.
Yes.
Great. So thank you so much, everyone, for, again, a wonderful film and your fantastic work. Something that was very notable, I think, in the movie and perhaps a little bit more subtle in the discussion is that the majority of these groups are men, as we have also seen in the US. Do we have a problem with masculinities? And is the intersectional feminists had a role to play? How do we kind of really also delve into this hugely misogynistic and sexist rhetorics that is also overlaid by the racism?
Really good question, and I'd love to call on you to answer the second part of that. You're right. There's the far right has a problem with women. About 90% of the people I met were men. I was undercover for about 6 months before I met a woman, and she was actually someone who was funding the conference in Tallinn. Unsurprisingly, lots of the people I met while undercover either think that women are baby-making machines or people who can be easily manipulated into bed. And that, unsurprisingly, does not probably make women feel very welcome in these spaces. And these are the kinds of things that I was hearing all the time. One of those two opinions generally. As to what can be done about it,
Thank you. Lots can be done about it. One of the things that, for example, at Les Foulards Violets we've done is that we've established very, very strong connections with the women's strike. Generally, we are very much part of the women's strike, but that wasn't easy, to be honest with you. It was a very long conversation, discussions about especially the place of the headscarf, for example, when it comes to women, the choice to wear it, the choice not to wear it. It is quite difficult to go away from a certain vision of what a liberated woman is and to kind of integrate the fact that liberation is defined by the person and not necessarily by a standard. For example, for someone that is clearly Islamophobic, I'm their worst nightmare because I'm a Muslim woman that is very much I don't shut up. I mean, I'm giving you a favor not to kind of going into the conversation every time, but like in a sense, it's going there and kind of meeting the people and telling them really who are the people that they're actually trying to target. And what's really very interesting for us, and especially I think it really showed very, very clearly since October 2023, the start of the genocide, is that we are trying, especially when it comes to the Muslim community, we are trying to kind of put us into squares. It's the brutal men against the poor woman. And if the woman is not a poor woman, she becomes a submissive porte-parole, so like kind of a, how do you say it in English again? Porte-parole? Spokesperson for misogynistic men. And it's very difficult to kind of go away from that. It takes a long time. It also takes a long time for people to realize that Muslim women that wear a headscarf are actually human beings, because we're targeting them all the time when it comes to access to public spaces, when it comes to even like going to school, with bringing your kids to school. In Switzerland, we always say that we're very lucky because we have such a horrendous example in France, but it's actually very insidious here. And not having access to a job, not having access to studies, not having access to actually everything that they're trying to portray the Arab men doing to their women, to the Muslim women and the Arab women, they're doing it to the Muslim and Arab women. So in a way, it's extremely sarcastic, but I have hope because thank God there's lots of good people out there. I have hope as well because things are moving forward into the right direction. And despite everything that is happening, despite the genocide, despite the brutalization of Arab men and Muslim men, I think people are actually seeing that things are changing, and it's giving me a lot of hope.
There was a question there. Yes. Keep your hand up so they can see you.
Wait, can I? Sorry.
Thank you so much for your important work and the documentary. I hope it inspires people to do the same in Switzerland, because the group they showed you on Telegram, Jungetat, they come from Switzerland, so they were founded here in 2020. And also they have been links made to members of the biggest party in Switzerland, the UDC. So that's my first question. Like, how do you be anti-fascist in Switzerland when the biggest political party has like links to those like extremist far-right people? And I'm very sorry, it's like such a big question. And maybe my second question was about, in the documentary, you were speaking about the fact that the money is probably in like a country where it's safe and secure. And my question is it Switzerland? Like, did you, like, do you know where this money is hidden? And thank you so much for your work.
Harry and the Barney.
Quick one first.
And, yeah.
It was a state, Wyoming in the US, at a business address that is coincidentally used by a lot of different far-right activists. And the laws in Wyoming mean that it's hard to find out a lot about a company there in a way that it isn't elsewhere. But good guess.
For me, it's really pointing out the performative, pointing out people that are trying to sound like they're not very happy with what's happening, but they don't really do anything about it. And I'm talking about everyone in here in the parliament, with the exception of probably maximum 10 people. So in a way, we've seen it with our work. So Les Foulards Violets, we do a lot of work with elected politicians that face-to-face, they're very, very happy to tell us, yes, we are very much okay with your, and we support your ideas, but when it comes to actually doing it publicly, it becomes very difficult because they know that the electorate are not going to elect them again after. So for me, there's also something that I've seen also like recently in the US where people actually just in front of techno-fascism and ultra-capitalism, they're just like, I'm protesting because I'm wearing pink. I mean, at the end of the, like, I was really baffled. I was baffled because I was like, is this really your way of taking down fascism? And in Switzerland, it's also the same. It's like, oh, I'm actually doing a strike between 12:02 and 12:07. So at the end of the day, we're trying to protest but not disrupt anything. So whenever we do something, we try to be very polite. I think the time of politeness has ended a long time ago.
I think there was a question down here towards the end. More. Yeah, okay. So let's get a microphone down there. There are at least a couple of questions. Just keep your hand up. The lady in gray here in the front, yes? And then we come behind to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your work and for this incredibly interesting conversation. I've been thinking about an observation that we often end up comparing the far right that exists in the US with some of the nuances that we see in Europe. And I also think about how the social state in the US has completely been evaporated over the past years, which in Europe, we're in the process of it, sure, but we're definitely not as close to it just yet. So I'm wondering, when we do make these comparisons and when we do ask for sort of understanding of people holding certain views, aren't we making it a bit too easy in Europe? Because there's still a lot of provisions. There are still a lot of avenues that we can take. So I mean, I'm super grateful for the work that you guys are doing, because it's just showing that we have these avenues and that we have to freaking use them. And that it's very, sometimes it's a slippery slope to have, I think, at least in Europe, too much understanding of certain groups, because I mean, we have the avenues and we have an education system that should really end up educating us about the importance of anti-fascism. So I'm wondering how you think about these nuances.
Let me ask Lumir to answer this question, because she sits on both sides of the ocean.
Yeah, I think it is very correct that the poverty in the US and the poverty in Europe is radically different. Like, the richest country in the world has child labor now. You know, a bunch of states have literally almost abolished fines for child labor. That's insane. And it's not the case in Europe. That is very correct. And I think that is also why we don't have Trump or a Trump adjacent president. I also really understand the tension that there is between holding people accountable for their votes and the consequences of these votes and extending a hand. I think, that is a very difficult, it is difficult work because you don't want to say to far-right voters that it's totally fine and it's as if they voted for any other party, because it really isn't. But at the same time, these people exist. They have the right to vote. And so they're going to use it. I personally believe that they should not vote for the far right, because not only, by principle, is the far right going to kill people, but it's also just not good for them. And I do believe that at the end of the day, people tend to vote for their own personal interests. And that is everyone. Me as a woman, that is why I vote for the left. That is why the LGBTQ plus community tends to vote for the progressives, because they have their backs. I mean, what I'm a little frustrated with is that sometimes we place so much blame on the white working class politically, with reason, again, because, their votes have terrible consequences, but it does not really help us operate in a system in which these people have the right to vote and they're going to use it. And so I think we really need to start thinking, what is a political narrative in which these people feel at home while holding them accountable to their problematic views? And I think to do that, there needs to be love. I don't think you shame people into voting for you. I don't think you humiliate people into voting for you. And I think any honest conversation has to be rooted in love. And I think maybe, again, not everyone should do this work, because I 100% understand that if you're a direct victim of these people's votes, you don't want to be in a conversation with them. I get that, but somebody has to. Otherwise, what's going to happen is what is happening in the US right now.
We're running out of time. Well, let's take one last question. Was the gentleman down there at the back? Yes. Raise your hand again so we can see you.
First, sorry for my shit English.
It's okay.
Ils ont une traduction?
Posez la question en français.
Ok.
Okay, so let me react to what we feminists can do. For instance, what I did is that for 2 years I was member of a Facebook group that was called Anti-Feminist because I knew that it existed. I was very shocked that it existed. I would usually go for walks in French-speaking Switzerland or collecting mushrooms. That were the groups that I was linked to. And I wanted to know who these people were. And I was very shocked because I found out that these people could have been my children. And they even accepted feminists, but we needed to remain polite. They ended up blacklisting me because they wanted to remain amongst us. So they were very happy with Trump's arrival. They have a pro-toxic male messages. There is the whole parabellum movement and everything else that we've seen in the film. So it isn't something that is quite new for me because we also find these people within these Facebook groups. And I want to hear that one of the solutions is not to leave people amongst themselves. We must go and speak to them. And when they publish fake news, very often it's written 10 times more feminicides in lesbian couples than in heterosexual couples. And I said, well, like, if you want to be taken seriously, do not start with fake news. And so it's important to go and get in touch with them and to look for them. This is the question that we've had. So I will not interpret for Nick. I will interpret for...
Merci pour la remarque.
Thank you for your question.
We need to build contact. And the thing also I wanted to react to what Lumir has said about not shaming people. I don't think, I think Lumir is right. We shouldn't shame people, but we should make people accountable for responsible, and also we need to hold them accountable at the end of the day, and that's what I think is quite important, is kind of bridging and talking to people, and also each community needs to be responsible for their own. It's like in a couple. Like I'm not, if I'm married to someone, I'm not going to go and try to change his parents. His parents are his business. My parents are my business. And at the end of the day, my community, I need to educate them. But I'm trying and I'm waiting for the same education from other groups. And what the lady has said at the back of the room is very much one way of doing it, just engage in conversations, but also meet in real life. And that's what, for us as collectives, we've never seen so much beautiful things coming out unless we're out there gardening, reading books, dancing, just engaging in conversations that sometimes have nothing to do with politics. But then people are looking at you and they're like, actually, I've never met a Muslim before. Actually, I've never met a black person before. Actually, I've never met a transgender person before. So this is our responsibilities as human beings, to really build those connections.
Thank you. So thank you, Saoussen. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Lumir. Thank you all of you for staying. Thank you very much.